everyone, welcome back to She Blurs Podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Shell, and today's guest is Josh. Hi, Josh.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you for having me.
So, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself as an author, a horror author?
Sure, yeah. I am actually pretty new to the whole gig. My first debut novel, King's Hill, came out just last year in October.
Oh.
And I'm coming kind of late to the game. I'm almost 50 years old, and just put out my first book. But yeah, I've been pretty much dedicating myself to writing horror for the last 2 years, and yeah. So after King's Hill, I had my second novella, The Woodcutters, came out the following month, and yeah, I've just been kind of cranking, and I've got new books slated for 2025 and 2026.
Wow. That's nice. So, how long did it take for you to write your first book?
I would say probably a little less than a year of solid work. It's one of those where it's like I think it about 25 years in the process, and then a year of actually doing the thing. But
So, you had the ideas, you just never wrote it down until just recently.
yeah, it's definitely. I would say King's Hill, my debut, is definitely my most personal book, and a lot of the ideas in there and a lot of the kind of concepts were definitely brewing for a good long while before I finally got around to putting them into story form. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about King's Hill. What was your hardest time writing the book? Like the hardest scene?
Ooh, I would say endings. I think that traditionally, I think horror stories, the endings are always a little difficult to pull off. Um, Stephen King has talked about this. That like at a certain point, you kind of have to show your cards, right, and hope that it kind of lives up to all the buildup. And and yeah, there were definitely a kind of a lot of balls up in the air in that novel, and and yeah, I would say the end of that book actually went through a decent amount of revision through the editorial process to make it actually work right. So
Mhm. Oh, okay. And you said that that book was the most personal book for you. Why was that?
well, so the main character in King's Hill, Sadie, is a young woman who's basically been diagnosed with multiple kind of autoimmune diseases, and is basically trying to come to terms with essentially being disabled at a fairly young age, which is a thing that I've witnessed my own wife going through over the last 15 years or so, and which is a pretty real challenge, and so just kind of the idea of placing that kind of character at the center of the story, and letting her kind of be the hero of that story, um, yeah, was pretty personal to me.
Oh, okay. Did you have to do a lot of research for this book?
Not not so much, no. I don't know. I'm always, people on the internet are always like, oh, if people saw my browsing history, the FBI would come for me. And I'm always like, I'm always researching the most banal stuff. I'm like, I'm trying to figure out how long it takes you to drive, between here and there. And otherwise, all the weird stuff's in my head. Um, so yeah, I'd say most of the kind of like medical stuff, unfortunately, I have a little too much knowledge already. Um, and, and otherwise it's, no, I just really enjoyed kind of, the world building aspect of it, and kind of creating kind of this, place that is this kind of fictional version of my hometown that I could just kind of stock with all the weirdest things that I could come up with.
Yeah. Which one of your characters, or if you have more, did you relate to the most and why?
It's always I don't know. I always have the sense that like as a writer, like every character is basically a thinly veiled version of myself. Um, the good guys, the bad guys, the monsters, you I think you just kind of put yourself into all of them. Um, my book coming out in 2025, named Fortress, coming out from Off Limits Press. Um, there's a character who on the page really doesn't resemble me at all. I think that would be the one. It takes place in a school. I'm a school teacher, and I think that was one of those places where I was able to kind of uh, dump some of myself into it the most. But yeah, I don't know. I think like creating characters is this interesting kind of way of kind of saying a lot about yourself and also kind of masking a lot about yourself. And so yeah,
Okay.
it's kind of hard for me to kind of point to that. There's certainly none. There's like, oh, that's me.
That's true. That's true. So, can you tell us a little bit about this book, like what it's about?
So yeah, Kings Hill, as I said, so Sadie is going through kind of a life change right now, and she and her husband have also made a move into a new place to follow a new job, and she's essentially disabled at this point, and but she takes a very part-time job, like a 1 day a week kind of gig at the local um, prison, which is Kings Hill, and she's teaching writing to inmates. And so we actually spend a fair amount of time in the classroom in the book. And one of the inmates in there is kind of a spooky old guy who um, she doesn't learn until a little later is actually a convicted serial killer
Oh,
who's very near the end of his life. And so through the work that they're doing in the classroom, through these notebooks, he kind of starts to, for the first time, tell his story. And so we're getting kind of dual narratives. We're getting the real time with Sadie, and we're getting this narrative from the 1980s where the killings originally happened. And so we learn that there's more to it. Of course, there might be other people involved, and there might be kind of an occult angle to the killings that happened. And so, of course, she has to start digging and seeing what she can find. And the next thing you know, she's now kind of involved in this occult triangle.
oh, nice. And we can get that book on your Amazon page and on your website that I got linked on here.
Yep, you can find it pretty much anywhere that books are sold.
Okay. Is it an audiobook yet?
It is not, no.
Uh, oh, okay. So, I wanted to talk about your next book, The Woodcutters. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Sure thing, yeah. So The Woodcutters is a novella, and it's the closest thing that I've come to historical fiction. I say that with a big caveat. So I live in northern Wyoming, where there's we don't have much, but we do have historical landmarks. So, um, and there's a local kind of landmark not far from where I live, where there's this thing known as the Wagon Box Fight, where during the Indian Wars, a group of woodcutters was kind of pinned down for most of the day by native forces, and this was all kind of in the slow lead up toward like Little Bighorn and some of the biggest fighting in the area. Um, and I basically took that very very loose idea. You asked if I did a lot of research, and it's like I didn't even research my historical fiction novel. I just really kind of took that as a jumping off place. I'm not really pretending that it's historically accurate. And so that is pretty much the opening scene, is that we have our woodcutters going into this ravine heading out from the fort, and they get ambushed, and there's an attack. Our main character is a young man with kind of a troubled history that unfolds over the course of the book. He manages to get away along with one of his compatriots who has taken an arrow to the temple and spends most of the book with an arrow sticking out of his head and not quite right. But I don't know. I'm a really big fan of kind of the kind of sub genre of the bad place. The King's Hill plays on this idea as well, but just where something isn't right about the geographical location. And so what we learn is that it's, there's not just angry natives out there. There's something else in the woods. There's some sort of force, and the direction gets kind of messed up, and we end up kind of going into some real gory horror show kind of stuff out there in the woods.
Oh, wow. Wow. How did this story come about? Like, what inspired you to write this story?
I don't know. Like I said, the historical event, I just seemed like the beginning of something.
Uh-huh.
If you were to actually write the historical event, there's not much to it. They're pinned down for most of the day. They come home. But but yeah, I like that as a starting place, and there's kind of that triggering event. And like I said, I really like the idea of the just kind of the sinister location, and Wyoming is just so kind of big and open, and you can definitely, just being out in the wilderness, if you're up the mountain, it can feel a little spooky sometimes. Just the
Oh, yeah.
so I just wanted to, yeah, I don't really know where the actual story part of it came from. Just I'm not much of a planner, so I just like once I have that kind of triggering event, just kind of see where it takes me. So.
Okay, okay. I like that one too. So I wanted to talk about your last book, the last book that's on here, because I really, really, really love that cover. It scared me at first. I was like, what is that? And I had to look closely, and I'm like, what is that on that screen, on that book? And I'm like, I have to talk about this book. So can you tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired the cover?
So Symbols Eat Guitars is actually a novelette. It's so it can be read in a sitting, and it just came out earlier this month from Black Hair Press, and I believe that there will be an audio book version of that on the way. But so yeah, that cover is actually an homage to the Clash's London Calling, where an iconic photo of bass guitar being destroyed. Here it's been transformed into a zombie. So this is pretty different from the other books. So this is a story about a group of three friends who were in a band, and they're doing kind of their little farewell tour. They're in kind of a punkish outfit, and they're getting a little older now, and having to get real jobs and things. And so this is kind of the last hurrah, and they get a last minute gig again in kind of rural Wyoming, down in this canyon, and it's going pretty well. And then there's a train derailment in the middle of the gig that kind of gets everybody's attention and kind of puts an end to the show, and everybody rushes out. And whatever's in those train cars is not good, and it's all spilling into the water. So this is like, on the one hand, like a straight up just kind of zombie survival horror story, where these people start transforming into these disgusting, like their faces and heads all start to bulge up into these white pussy things. But there's also kind of a character twist. One of the three characters isn't quite who he seems, but it's really kind of a relationship story. The kind of about, you know, people not really being who you think they are and what you can depend on. And yeah, this is also kind of a weirdly personal story. It's kind of a breakup song and a zombie horror format.
Wow. Wow. So how did you what inspired the characters? Was it people that you know in real life?
Yeah. So my wife and I have played music together and in bands for decades, and yeah, so it was basically the impetus for the story was kind of the end of a friendship that had been pretty central in my life, and uh, I don't know, the story ended up being kind of a nasty kind of therapy for working through that. So,
Oh, okay. Okay, got that. Got that. What was your hardest scene to write in this book?
I think I don't know. I think at one point it, you know, it's a in a story like this, it kind of like really comes down to the action. Um, and I don't know. It, like I said, it's a novelette. It's not a very long story, so we get into the action pretty quick. Um, and I'm kind of a slow burny kind of guy. Like I like to take some time to to get into the story before the action rolls usually. Um,
Mhm.
so um, so yeah, I think once kind of all the wheels are in motion, uh, just kind of keeping everything moving along as we head toward the climax was kind of the challenge there, but it moves pretty fast.
Oh, okay. And now I want to speak about your upcoming book. I don't know if I've seen it on here. I don't know if you have it on here yet, do you?
So so the announcement for my next upcoming book is a while back actually, and that's from Off Limits Press, and yeah, it's called Fortress, and it is a full length novel, and it should be coming out in 2025, and that's another one that's pretty close to my heart. I've spent the last 17 years in public education, and I spent the last 10 of those at an alternative high school,
Hmm.
and that's a pretty important part of who I am, and my identity, and so it's basically a creature feature where we have a completely invented kind of alternative artsy school tucked away in the mountains. So we get a little bit of kind of like winter isolation horror as well, um, but it's a group of kind of, you know, students who've not been successful in other places, kind of our rejects and artsy kids, and there's a big snowstorm and they're stormed in, etc. But then a monster comes out of the lake, and it's really kind of a Grendel retelling in a lot of ways, um, which gets me out of having to explain anything about why there's a monster in the lake. We just say, yeah, there's a monster in the lake. But so it becomes a survival story um, that I would say has a pretty strong kind of political edge to it. I'm obviously very protective of the students that I teach and care for, and it seems like there's a awful lot in the world that's designed to make the world a unsafe place for them. So there's a little bit of allegory in there, but mostly, hopefully, it's just a good creature feature romp.
And you said it comes out in 2025?
Yes, I don't actually have a
Date.
solid date for that yet, but and
Oh,
then I do have another book coming, but the official announcement for that won't happen until late next week. So, but
Ooh,
I just signed a contract on a new book, so I'm very excited about
nice.
that.
Nice. So do you do writing full time? Like, is this your full time job now? Aside, like, you don't teach anymore?
No, I'm still teaching full time. I get up at about 5 in the morning and write until it's time to head out, and that's I just try and get my 1,000 words a day and just build it chunk by chunk, and it's working so far. So,
Nice. So before I let you go, I want to ask you one final question.
okay.
What what advice would you give to authors who are starting out, like new authors, like starting out like yourself?
Read, read, read. I really, I do have some writing training, um, but I've also spent my entire life voraciously reading books, and there never will be any better training than just reading everything that you can get your hands on, the good and the bad and the ugly, um, and then and starting to discern what you know works for you.
Mhm.
And then other than that, I'd say the kind of workaday kind of philosophy is I think really is what it's about. Just I very rarely take a day off. 7 days a week. It's up in the morning, do the thing, because that's I've wanted to write books most of my life, but it was the kind of discipline part that
Uh-huh.
I could never quite do. I'd write drafts, they'd stink, I wouldn't come back to them. And then I'd just kind of fall away. And so, it's when you do the work is when the things happen. So,
Yeah, that's true. I want to thank you so much for being a guest today, and I hope you have a great day.
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Bye. Hey everyone, thank you all so much for listening to She Blurbs podcast and for Josh for being a guest. So if you would like to purchase any of his books, you can go to his website. It's joshhansonhorror.blogspot.com, and you can go on here to purchase his books. These are the three books that we chatted about, and then his upcoming book is not until next year, like he said. So yeah, you can go on here and purchase any of his books. And his Amazon links are on this side right here to go purchase them. And thank you all so much for listening to Sheep Blurs podcast. See you next time. Bye.